There's a kind of loneliness that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with a suitcase or knock on your door. It doesn't send a warning. It just quietly rearranges your furniture while you're sleeping. And by the time you notice, you've already forgotten where things used to be. I know, because it happened to me. My name is Lily Beaumont. I'm 64 years old. I taught 3rd grade for 28 years at Eastside Elementary in Atlanta, Georgia. I know how to read a room. I know how to spot a child who's struggling before they raise their hand. I spent 3 decades of my life learning to see what people don't say out loud. And still, I almost missed it, right inside my own home. The morning I finally understood what had been happening, I was sitting at my kitchen table at 6 o'clock, the way I always do, coffee in hand, the Atlanta sun just beginning to come up over the back fence. The impatiens I'd planted along the garden border were blooming, pale pink against the red Georgia clay, the same color they'd been every spring for 15 years. Everything looked exactly the same, but the chair beside me, James's chair, the old oak one he'd pulled up to that table every morning for 30 years, was gone. It had been moved to a corner of the living room 3 months before. Tara said it was blocking the walkway. I said fine. I moved it myself, actually, carried it across the room with both hands, and set it down where she pointed. That morning I sat in its absence and drank my coffee and looked at the garden and told myself everything was fine. It wasn't fine. But I wasn't ready to say that yet. I wasn't ready to look directly at what had been growing in my own house the way a crack grows in a foundation. Invisible until the morning the floor shifts and you realize it's been moving for years. This is the story of how I lost myself slowly, in small pieces, in the home I'd lived in for 31 years. And how I found my way back. Not through a fight, not through revenge, but through something harder and quieter than either of those things. Let me tell you how it started. James Beaumont was not a man who said I love you easily. He said it in other ways. He said it by getting up at 5:30 every Saturday morning to fix whatever had broken during the week before I could call a repairman. He said it by keeping a spare notepad in his shirt pocket to write down things I mentioned in passing, a book I wanted, a plant I admired at the nursery, a restaurant someone at school had recommended. He said it by reading the newspaper every morning in that oak chair by the kitchen window, always leaving the crossword puzzle untouched because he knew I'd want it. We were married for 33 years. He died in April of 2020, on a Tuesday, in a hospital room I wasn't allowed to enter. COVID took him in 11 days. One morning he had a fever. 11 days later he was gone. I never got to say goodbye. I never got to hold his hand at the end. I just got a phone call, and then a box of his belongings, and then the silence of a house that still smelled like him for weeks afterward. I don't say this for pity. I say it because you need to understand what the house meant to me after he was gone. That house, a brick colonial on Sycamore Drive in the East Side neighborhood of Atlanta, was every morning we'd ever had together. It was 31 years of Saturday breakfasts and Sunday crosswords and summer evenings on the back porch, watching the fireflies come up from the garden. It was the kitchen where James made his mother's sweet potato pie every Thanksgiving, where I graded papers at the table while he watched the game, where Darnell did his homework and complained about it and grew up and left and came back on holidays and left again. After James died, I stayed. Of course I stayed. I learned to make coffee for one. I learned to sleep in the middle of the bed. I learned that grief is not one thing. It's 100 small daily discoveries that the person is gone. The newspaper crossword sitting untouched because I didn't want to do it alone. The garden that still needed tending whether I felt like tending it or not. The oak chair by the window that I couldn't bring myself to sit in, not once in the 2 years he was gone. I had my routines. I had Dot. Dorothy Washington, everybody called her Dot, had been my closest friend since we taught together at Eastside in 1993. She was 3 years older than me, louder than me, funnier than me. And she had a gift for saying the hard thing in a way that made you laugh before you realized she'd cut you open. Every Wednesday morning, 7 o'clock, we met at Corner Grind on Peachtree and had coffee and talked for 2 hours. We'd done it for 7 years without missing a Wednesday except for funerals and the one time Dot had her gallbladder out. Those Wednesday mornings kept me sane after James died. Dot never tried to fix anything. She just showed up. That's a rare skill, and I never took it for granted. I also had my garden. Every spring I planted cachua, tomatoes, the same way James and I always had, in the raised beds along the back fence. Big boys and Cherokee purples and a few sun golds for color. I'd go out in the morning before the heat came up and water them and check for hornworms and talk to them the way you talk to something that can't answer back but listens anyway. James used to tease me about that. "Lily, those plants cannot hear you." And I'd say, "Then they can't argue with me either, can they?" That garden was the first thing I let go of, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I should tell you about the heirloom box first. The sewing box. My mother, Estelle May Cooper, was a woman who kept her important things in plain sight. Her Bible on the kitchen table, not the nightstand. Her good earrings and a coffee mug on the dresser. And her sewing box, a faded blue tin with a pattern of morning glories on the lid, on the highest shelf in her bedroom, the one you needed a step stool to reach. She left it to me when she passed in 2019, just 1 year before James. I brought it home and put it on the high shelf in my bedroom, same position she'd always kept it. Same height, same spot. I didn't open it. I told myself I would when I was ready. But the months passed, and then James died, and then more months passed, and I still wasn't ready, so the box stayed on its shelf, and I walked past it every day without opening it. "When you need it," she had written on the envelope inside. I didn't know about the envelope yet. I just knew the box was there, and somehow that was enough. The way knowing a life jacket is in the closet is enough, even on the days the water is calm. And then Darnell called to tell me he was bringing someone home for Thanksgiving. Her name was Tara. Tara Hollis was 34 years old when I first met her, and she was the kind of beautiful that makes you feel like you're the one who should apologize for how you look. She had the posture of someone who'd been told from childhood that the room was watching, and the smile of someone who believed it. She was polite. She was attentive. She called me Miss Lily the first time, and me Lily, Mother Lily, after the third visit, which was a warmth I accepted before I'd thought about whether I'd offered it. Darnell had been building his small IT consulting firm for 2 years by then. He was doing all right, not thriving, but growing. When Tara suggested at Easter dinner that it might make more financial sense for them to move in with me temporarily while the business found its footing, Darnell looked at me with the same expression he'd had at 7 years old when he wanted a second piece of sweet potato pie. Hopeful, a little guilty about the hope. "Just until the company stabilizes, Mama. Maybe a year." I said yes. Of course I said yes. He was my son. They moved in on a Thursday in March, 2 carloads of boxes and a rented truck for the furniture they put in the basement. Tara brought lavender sachets and hung them in the hall closet. The house smelled different by Friday. The first incident was small enough that I nearly didn't register it. I came downstairs on a Saturday morning to find the kitchen cabinets reorganized. The coffee cups had moved from the left cabinet to the right. The spices, which James and I had kept alphabetically for 20 years, were now grouped by cuisine. The mixing bowls were stacked differently. Tara was making breakfast, humming to herself. "I hope you don't mind," she said, not turning around. "It flows so much better this way. I watched a video about kitchen efficiency." I opened my mouth, then I closed it. Maybe she's just trying to help, I told myself, and poured my coffee from the new location of the pot. It was such a small thing. July, year 1. James's oak chair had been by the kitchen window for so long it had left faint indentations in the linoleum. You could see the ghost of it even when it wasn't there. 4 small circles where the legs had pressed down through 30 years of morning newspapers. "It really does block the flow of traffic through here," Tara said one evening, with that same reasonable, pleasant tone she used for everything. "What if we moved it to the living room? It's such a beautiful piece. It deserves to be showcased." Darnell looked at me. I looked at the chair. "Sure," I said. I carried it myself. I didn't ask for help. I picked it up and walked it across the room and set it in the corner she'd indicated, between the bookshelf and the wall, where the afternoon light didn't quite reach. That night I sat in the kitchen alone after they'd gone to bed, and I felt something I didn't have a word for. Not grief, exactly. Not anger. Something quieter than both. Like the color being turned down in a room. Not dark, just less bright than it was before. I thought of James reading his paper in that chair, the way he held the pages, the way he'd look up when I came in, and then look back down without saying anything, because we'd been together long enough that presence was enough. No words needed. I sat at the table for a long time that night and looked at the corner where the chair now was, half in shadow. It's just a chair, I told myself. You water the seed. You don't pull the stem. Thanksgiving, year 1. Tara's mother, her younger sister, 2 friends from work, and a neighbor couple. 14 people in my dining room for Thanksgiving. She'd asked, and I'd said yes. Again, of course I'd said yes. It was the generous thing to do, the welcoming thing. I'd grown up in a house where the table always had room for one more. But at some point during that meal, I looked up from my sweet potato casserole and realized that every conversation was moving through Tara. She had assigned the seats. She had chosen the menu. Miss Lily, let's try something new this year. I found the most beautiful recipes. And my sweet potato casserole, James's mother's recipe, had ended up as a side dish rather than the centerpiece it had been for 30 years. She wasn't cruel about it. That's the thing I need you to understand. There was no moment of obvious cruelty. She was warm and gracious, and she made sure my glass was full, and she introduced me to everyone as Darnell's incredible mother, the teacher. And yet I sat at my own Thanksgiving table and felt like a guest who'd arrived early and stayed too long. Dot asked me about it the following Wednesday over coffee. Did it feel like your house? She asked, her hands wrapped around her mug. Of course it did, I said. Dot looked at me the way she'd been looking at me for 30 years when she thought I was lying to myself. I changed the subject. Zoe arrived in April, 7 pounds and 4 ounces, with James's forehead and Darnell's stubbornness already evident in the way she screwed up her face at the hospital light. I held her in the delivery room and felt something unlock in my chest that I hadn't realized was locked. Here was something new. Here was something that had nothing to do with loss. I became Zoe's primary daytime caregiver while Tara went back to her remote work and Darnell ran his business. I was the one who learned her hunger sounds versus her tired sounds. I was the one who found the exact blanket weight she needed to settle. I was the one who started reading to her at 4 months, sitting in the rocking chair in the nursery with a picture book, my voice low, her eyes tracking the ceiling the way babies do when they're trying to figure out the world. Those mornings with Zoe were the best part of my days. And then, gradually, they began to change. It started with a shared calendar app Tara set up on our phones. Childcare hours, color-coded. My time with Zoe was Tuesdays and Thursdays, 7 to noon. Other days, Tara worked from the nursery or had a childcare worker in. It just helps everyone know where they are, Tara explained, smiling. Organization is love, right? I smiled back. I accepted the calendar invitation. But I noticed that when I showed up on a Wednesday, not a scheduled day, just because I missed her, just because I was Zoe's grandmother, Tara would appear in the doorway within 10 minutes, pleasant and apologetic. Oh, I actually had some things planned for today, if you don't mind. So I stopped showing up on unscheduled days, and I pretended not to mind. Darnell's Sunday calls had been 30-40 minutes when he first moved in, which seemed backwards, calling your mother when you lived in the same house. But that was how we'd always connected, through the phone, through the ritual of it. It was our time. By the second summer, the calls had stopped. We didn't need to call. We lived together. But somehow we also never talked. We passed each other in the kitchen. We watched television in the same room. Once I realized we hadn't had a real conversation in 3 weeks. I mentioned it to Dot. That's not an accident, Dot said. Dot, I said. Psst. I'm just saying what I see. She's not doing anything wrong. She's just... I know, Dot said. That's what makes it hard to name. The master bedroom really is so much better for Zoe as she gets older, Tara said. All that space for her toys, her little reading corner. And honestly, me, Lily, the smaller room is so cozy, I think you might prefer it. I had lived in that bedroom for 29 years. James died in that bedroom. Not literally, not there, but that was where his shoes still were, lined up inside the closet door. That was where his reading glasses were still in the nightstand drawer, because I couldn't move them yet. Of course, I said, whatever works best for Zoe. I moved my things over 2 afternoons. I was very efficient about it. I put James's reading glasses in my jewelry box. I didn't look at them while I did it. The first night in the small room, I locked the door before I went to sleep. I didn't analyze why. I just reached for the little push-button lock the way you reach for a glass of water in the dark. On instinct, out of some deep thirst I hadn't known I had. It was the only door in the house that was mine, so I locked it. Just some estate restructuring, Mama, for tax purposes. Raymond went over it. Well, not Raymond, our new guy. He's sharper for this kind of thing. It's all standard. Just sign on the highlighted lines. Darnell slid the papers across the kitchen table. He was already on his phone, half attending. The papers were long. The language was dense. I was 63 years old with a cup of lukewarm coffee, and Zoe laughing in the next room, and the sound of Tara's work call coming down the hall, and my son was telling me it was standard. I trusted him. He was my son. I had carried him. I had taught him to read and to ride a bike and to apologize when he was wrong, and to say thank you like he meant it. I signed on the highlighted lines. This is the moment I would come to know as the hinge point, the before and after, the thing that looked like nothing. We're thinking about redoing the backyard, Tara mentioned one morning, coffee in hand, looking out the window at my garden. A patio, maybe, some built-in seating. It would be so much better for entertaining. The tomatoes were coming in. The Cherokee purples were just starting to blush at the shoulders, the way they do before they turn deep and sweet. The sun golds were already ripe, small and bright as buttons along the top wire. This season, you mean? I asked. I think we'd start planning this fall for next spring. She smiled at me over her mug. You don't have to worry about the garden this year if it's too much. We can just let it go. I was standing in the sink. In my hands was the small clay pot I used to start seedlings. Terracotta, cracked along one side, held together with a wrap of garden twine. James had bought it at a hardware store in 2003. I'd been starting tomatoes in it every February since. I set it on the windowsill. Sure, he said. That makes sense? I did not go outside and pull the seedlings I'd already started in the garage. I left them there. By May, they had leggy and pale from not enough light, and I quietly put them in the compost bin. That was the last season I planted tomatoes. I didn't understand yet what I was mourning. I thought I was just being flexible. I thought I was being a good mother-in-law, a good housemate, a generous woman who didn't make things difficult. I thought I was choosing peace. What I was actually doing, what I would come to understand only later, sitting in a small room with a blue tin box in my lap, was disappearing. One small surrender at a time. The coffee cups, the chair, the garden, the bedroom, the Sunday calls, the Thanksgiving table, each one so reasonable, each one so small. Until one morning I sat down in my own kitchen and realized I couldn't remember the last time the coffee had tasted right. And that was the morning I finally stopped pretending not to see. The morning it finally broke open was a Wednesday. I know it was a Wednesday because I was supposed to meet Dot at Corner Grind at 7, and I'd come downstairs early to have 30 quiet minutes to myself before I left. That was my ritual. Coffee alone first, then Dot. The two best parts of my week, in order. It was 5:40 in the morning. The house was still dark. I came down the stairs in my robe and slippers, not turning on the overhead light, just moving by the glow of the stove clock the way I had for 30 years in this house. I knew every creak of every floorboard. I knew which cabinet door stuck and which one swung too fast. I knew this house the way you know a piece of music you've played so many times, your hands remember it without asking your brain. I turned the corner into the kitchen and stopped. My mother's sewing box was on the kitchen table, the blue tin with the morning glories on the lid, the one I kept on the high shelf in my bedroom, the shelf you needed a step stool to reach. It was sitting in the middle of the kitchen table, and the lid was not fully closed. It was tipped at an angle, the way a lid sits when someone has opened it and set it back down in a hurry. I stood in the doorway for a moment without moving. Then I walked to the table and sat down and looked at the box without touching it. The stove clock said 5:42. From upstairs I could hear the white noise machine Tara ran in their bedroom. Zoe's room was quiet. I reached out and opened the lid all the way. Everything appeared to be there. The folded squares of fabric, scraps my mother had saved from 50 years of sewing, each one a piece of something else. A church dress, a quilt, a child's Easter outfit, the tin of needles, the wooden spool of heavy thread, the kind she used for quilting, the small brass thimble she'd worn so long the engraving on the side was smooth from her touch, the photograph, a wallet-sized one of her and my father at some church picnic, 1971, her in a yellow dress, him squinting into the sun. I went through everything twice. It all seemed to be there, but nothing was in the right place. The fabric squares had been unfolded and refolded slightly wrong. The needle tin was on the left instead of the right. The photograph, which my mother had always kept face up at the top of the box, had been placed face down. Someone had gone through it. Carefully, but not carefully enough. I put the lid back on and sat with my hands flat on the table, one on each side of the box, the way you sit with something fragile. I heard Tara's footsteps on the stairs. She came into the kitchen already dressed, which was unusual for 5:45 in the morning. She was wearing actual clothes, not pajamas, not a robe. She stopped when she saw me. "Oh, you're up early." Her voice was perfectly pleasant, not startled, controlled. "So are you," I said. Zoe was restless. I came down for water. She moved to the cabinet, filled a glass, drank some. Then she noticed the box on the table. "Oh, that. Zoe got into your room yesterday while I was on a call. You know how she is. I brought it down to check nothing was broken, but everything looked fine." She smiled at me. I looked at her. "She's 7, I said. "She can't reach that shelf. It's the high one." A pause. Not long. A half second. "She pushed the little step stool in from the bathroom," Tara said. "You know how curious she is. I'll talk to her about boundaries." She took her glass of water and went back upstairs. I sat at the table until I heard their bedroom door close. Then I sat a little longer. Then, very slowly, I picked up the sewing box and carried it upstairs and put it in the bottom of my closet, behind my winter coats, in the corner where the floor met the wall. Not the high shelf anymore. Somewhere harder to find. I didn't say anything to Dot about the box that morning. I sat across from her at corner grind and drank my coffee and listened to her talk about her grandson's school play, and I smiled at the right times, and I thought about the photograph placed face down. My mother had always kept it face up. Always. For 50 years. You don't put a picture of someone you love face down. On the drive home, I stopped at a red light on Peachtree, and I thought very clearly for the first time, what did she find in there? And what was she looking for? Raymond Aldridge had been James's attorney for 15 years before he became mine. He was 68, semi-retired, and he had the slow, deliberate manner of a man who had learned that most of the damage people brought to his office could have been prevented if someone had asked one careful question earlier. I had his number in my phone under Raymond, James's guy, which is what I'd always called him. I called him on a Thursday afternoon from the parking lot of the Kroger on Flat Shoals because I didn't want to be inside the house when I made the call, and I didn't know how to explain that to myself, except that it felt necessary. "Lily," he said, warm and unhurried. "It's good to hear from you. What can I do for you?" "Raymond, Darnell had me sign some paperwork about a year ago. He said it was estate restructuring for tax purposes. I'd like you to look at it." A pause on his end. Not concern exactly, just attention shifting into a different gear. "Do you have a copy?" "I should. I'll find it." "Bring it by the office," he said. "Whenever you're ready. No rush." I found the copy in my filing cabinet that evening, in the folder labeled House/Legal, behind the homeowner's insurance documents. It was a 7-page document. I had signed on pages 4 and 7. I looked at the title page this time, which I had not done when Darnell put it in front of me. The words at the top said, "Quitclaim deed, transfer of real property." I read it twice. Then I sat down on the edge of my bed, in the small room that used to be the guest room, with the document in my hands, and I tried to remember everything I knew about what a quitclaim deed was. I knew enough. I went to Raymond's office the next morning. Raymond read through the document without speaking. He was the kind of man who read the way other people breathed, steadily, completely, without interruption. I sat across the desk from him and watched his face and tried to read it the way I used to read my students' faces during a test, looking for the moment understanding arrived or the moment it didn't. He finished. He set the pages down. He aligned them with the edge of his desk blotter the way he always aligned things. Then he looked at me. "Lily," he said, "do you know what you signed?" "I think so," I said. "Tell me anyway." "This is a quitclaim deed. It transferred your ownership interest in the property at Sycamore Drive." He paused. "As of the date you signed this, February 14th of last year, the property is owned by Darnell James Beaumont and Tara Hollis Beaumont, jointly." The room was very quiet. From somewhere in the building I could hear a copier running. "My name," I said, "Ed, is not on the deed anymore. No, I had known it was coming. I had known it from the moment I read the title page. And still, hearing it out loud did something to the air in the room, thinned it somehow, like the pressure had changed. "He told me it was for tax purposes," I said. My voice was steady. I was proud of that. "He said it was restructuring." "It is a restructuring," Raymond said carefully, "in the sense that it restructured who owns your home." I looked at my hands in my lap. They were 64-year-old hands, the knuckles a little swollen from the arthritis that had started in my 50s, the skin looser than it used to be, the same hands that had held James's hand for 33 years and graded 10,000 papers and planted 20 seasons of tomatoes in the back garden. "He was on his phone," I said. "When he gave me the papers, he was already on his phone. He said it was standard." Raymond didn't say anything. He let me sit with it. "He's my son," I said. Not as an excuse, just as a fact, just as the truth of why I had signed without reading. "He's my son and I trusted him." "I know," Raymond said. "So what does this mean? What can I do?" Raymond leaned forward, his hands folded on the desk. "There are potential grounds to challenge the deed: undue influence, lack of informed consent. It's not simple, but it's not impossible. First, though, I need to know more about the full picture. I want to bring in someone I work with, a private investigator named Earl Simmons. He's good at finding the full picture." "You think there's more?" I said. Raymond looked at me evenly. "Lily, in my experience, when someone takes a house, they've usually taken other things first." Earl Simmons was 53 years old and had the unhurried, heavy-lidded look of a man who had seen so many versions of human dishonesty that nothing surprised him anymore, which I found oddly comforting. He sat in Raymond's conference room with a legal pad and a laptop and asked me questions for 2 hours. 3 days later, he came back with a folder. "Before I show you this," he said, "I want you to know that none of what's in here changes what happened to you. It explains some of it, but it doesn't make it your fault." "Show me," I said. He opened the folder to a printed court record from Fulton County, Georgia. Case number, date, a photograph attached. A woman who looked like Tara, but younger, her hair different, her face less polished. Tara Hollis's legal name before 2018 was Tara Lynn Greer, Earl said. In 2016, she was convicted in a Georgia court of mortgage fraud, specifically submitting falsified financial documents to obtain a home loan for a property in Decatur. She received a suspended sentence, 2 years probation, and a fine. I looked at the photograph. The eyes were the same. The way she held her chin, slightly elevated like she was measuring something, was the same. "She changed her name legally after the probation ended," Earl continued. "Tara Lynn Greer became Tara Nicole Hollis in March of 2018. Clean record under the new name. That's what came up when Darnell ran a background check before they got serious, if he ran one at all." "He didn't know," I said. It wasn't a question. "I don't believe so. No." I sat with that for a moment. My son had married a woman whose history he didn't know, and she had moved into my home, and I had made her coffee and called her by the name she'd given herself, and believed her when she explained things in that pleasant, reasonable voice. "There's more," Earl said. He turned to the next page. A credit report, or rather 3 of them, printed on bank letterhead, each one with a name I recognized. James Elroy Beaumont, my husband, dead for 4 years. 3 credit accounts were opened in your husband's name, Earl said, his voice matter-of-fact, clinical in the way that was its own kind of kindness. Bank of America, a Visa, $28,000. Wells Fargo, a MasterCard, $22,000. Chase, a personal line of credit, $25,000. All 3 opened between June and September of 2021. James died in April of 2020, I said. Yes. He'd been dead for over a year. Yes. The numbers sat on the page. $75,000. $75,000 opened in the name of a man who was in the ground. The billing address on all 3 accounts, Earl said, was your home address on Sycamore Drive. I thought about where I had been in June of 2021. I had been in my house, grieving, tending my garden, meeting Dot on Wednesdays, trying to learn how to sleep through the night. Tara and Darnell had moved in that March. She was living in my house, I said. She was sitting at my kitchen table. She was holding my granddaughter. Yes, Earl said, and she was using my dead husband's name to borrow $75,000. The signatures on the applications are forgeries, Earl said. Good ones. Whoever did them studied his actual signature carefully, but there are inconsistencies. James had a slight rightward drift in his capital letters that the forgeries miss. A handwriting expert would flag it immediately. I looked at the charge statements Earl had printed. Bank of America, Nordstrom, $4,200. Neiman Marcus, $3,800. A travel agency in Buckhead. Wells Fargo, a hotel in Charleston. A spa in Highlands, North Carolina. Restaurant charges I didn't recognize. Chase, a private matchmaking service. Subscription fees. More restaurants. The dresses Tara wore to church. The weekend trips she and Darnell took while I stayed home with Zoe. The jewelry. The shoes I'd noticed but never commented on. She was using James's credit to fund her life in my house, I said. That's what the evidence indicates. I looked out Raymond's office window at the Atlanta skyline. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The sun was making long rectangles across the conference table. Somewhere in my house right now, Tara was probably on a work call, or playing with Zoe, or reorganizing something that was mine. I thought of the photograph in my mother's sewing box, placed face down. I thought of the sewing box itself, taken from its shelf in the dark, gone through, put back wrong. She was looking for something, I said, half to myself. Earl glanced at Raymond. What? I said. That's actually the question I was going to raise, Earl said. Is there anything in your home, documents, financial records, anything your husband may have left, that someone else might know about or want access to? I opened my mouth. Then I stopped. I thought about my mother's sewing box on the bottom of my closet, behind the winter coats. I need to go home, I said. I waited until I was certain the house was empty. Tara had a standing Tuesday afternoon appointment she kept without fail, and Darnell was at a client site, and Zoe was at her Tuesday enrichment program until 4. I came in through the back door, the one off the kitchen, the one that opened with the key I'd carried on the same ring for 20 years. I went upstairs, into the small room that had been mine for 3 years. I opened the closet door, pushed aside the winter coats, reached into the corner where the floor met the wall. The box was there. I carried it to the bed and sat down and opened the lid and took everything out, piece by piece. The way you unpack something you need to inspect completely. The fabric squares, the needle tin, the spool of thread, the brass thimble, the photograph, which I placed face up, and then, beneath the fabric lining, the thin layer of cotton batting my mother had quilted to the bottom of the box to cushion everything. I felt it. A slight stiffness. A corner. I pressed along the lining until I found the edge, and I lifted it carefully, the way you lift something old and fragile, and beneath it was a plain white envelope, business-sized, sealed with tape, yellowed now along the edges. My mother's handwriting on the front. For Lily, when you need it. My hands were steady. I don't know why. You'd think they would shake. I opened it. Inside were 2 things. A letter, handwritten on 3 pages of her blue stationery, and behind the letter, a document. Official, folded in thirds. A certificate of some kind with a gold seal at the bottom. I read the letter first. My Lily girl, if you're reading this, then something has pushed you to the bottom of the box, and I'm glad I thought to leave something here for you to find. I am not a woman who talks about money because money was always a thing we prayed about, not a thing we discussed. But I want to tell you something I should have told you years ago. In 1987, your father and I put $4,000 into a real estate investment group out of Savannah. A man from our church, Gerald Morrison, was putting it together. Your father thought it was foolish. I thought Gerald was honest, and I was right about that, even if I was wrong about the timing, because for the first 8 years it did almost nothing. But I kept the certificate. I kept paying the small annual maintenance fee, never more than $80 a year, because I had a feeling about it, the way I have feelings about things. You know about my feelings. Gerald passed in 2009 and his son Robert took over. Robert was sharp. The portfolio grew. I received statements every year, and I put them in this box without telling anyone, because your father was proud, and I didn't want him to feel like I'd been right when he'd been wrong. By the time he passed, I had stopped keeping track of the number because it made me feel strange. I had it valued in 2018, the year before I got sick. The man from Robert's office came to my house and sat at my kitchen table and told me a number, and I thanked him and showed him to the door, and then I sat down and had a good cry, partly from gratitude and partly because I wished your father had known. The current contact is Robert Morrison, Morrison Heritage Properties, Savannah. His number is on the certificate. This is yours, Lily, not the family's, yours. Use it when you need it. I believe you'll know when that is. All my love. Mama, I unfolded the certificate. I read the name of the company. I read the share designation. I read the most recent valuation figure, handwritten in the margin in my mother's careful script, dated March 2018. $400,000. I sat on the edge of my bed in the small room with my mother's letter in one hand and the certificate in the other, and outside the window, the Atlanta afternoon was going gold the way it does in October. That particular southern gold that makes everything look briefly like it's been preserved in amber. I thought about my mother at her kitchen table in 1987, writing a check for $4,000 to a man from her church, while my father shook his head. I thought about her keeping the annual statements in a blue tin box on a high shelf for 30 years and never saying a word to anyone. I thought about her sitting across from Robert Morrison's representative in 2018 and learning a number that made her cry. I believe you'll know when that is. I pressed the letter against my chest and closed my eyes. Mama, I thought, you were always 3 steps ahead of the storm. I called Raymond from my bedroom at 4:15 before anyone came home. Raymond, I said, I found something. I need to come back in. Of course, he said. First thing tomorrow. And Raymond, I need you to get Earl working on one more thing. I told him about the sewing box being disturbed, about Tara being awake at 5:40 in the morning, already dressed, about the way she'd answered too quickly and too smoothly and with too much specific detail about a step stool. She was looking for the certificate, I said. I don't know how she knew to look. Maybe she found one of my mother's old statements somewhere in the house. Maybe she went through my files. But she knew there was something. She just didn't find it. I'll have Earl start tonight, Raymond said. I put my phone down. Then I sat very still for a moment, in the small room with the locked door, with my mother's letter and my mother's certificate, and the quiet October light coming through the window. Something had shifted in my chest. Not anger, or not only anger. Something more like clarity. The feeling of a fog that has been sitting on a landscape for so long you'd forgotten what the ground looks like, suddenly burning off in the morning sun. I had spent 4 years disappearing one small surrender at a time. I thought of the coffee cups moved to the wrong cabinet, the chair in the shadow, the garden I'd stopped planting, the bedroom I'd given up, the papers I'd signed without reading because I was a mother and I trusted my son. I thought of my mother writing a check for $4,000 and keeping it secret for 30 years because she had a feeling. You water the seed, I used to tell my students. You don't pull the stem. But sometimes, I understood now, holding her letter, sometimes you also have to protect what's growing from the frost. It was time to protect what was growing. I stood up. I smoothed my clothes. I put my mother's letter back in the envelope, put the certificate with it, and tucked them both inside my winter coat, the heavy wool one at the back of the closet, the one nobody ever touched. Then I went downstairs and started making dinner like it was any other Tuesday. The letter took me 4 nights to write, not because I didn't know what to say. I'd known what to say for years, the way you know the words to a song you haven't sung in so long you've convinced yourself you've forgotten it. The words were always there. I just hadn't been ready to let them out into the world where they would become real and irreversible. I wrote it by hand at the small desk in my room after the house went quiet. No overhead light, just the lamp on the desk, a circle of yellow in the dark. The same blue stationery my mother had used her whole life. I'd bought a box of it after she passed without quite knowing why. I wrote 4 drafts. 3 of them I folded and put in the trash can by the desk. The 4th one I read through twice and then set down and knew it was right. Not because it said everything, but because it said the true things, the ones that couldn't be taken back. I did not mention the quitclaim deed. I did not mention the credit accounts in James's name. I did not mention Tara at all. I wrote about James. Darnell, your father was not an easy man to know. I think you know that. He kept himself close, his feelings, his fears, the things that mattered most to him. He learned that from his own father, who learned it from his, and I imagine it goes back further than any of us can trace. But I knew him. 33 years is a long time to learn a person, and I learned him the way you learn a house you've lived in so long, your body knows it in the dark. I knew which parts of him were load-bearing and which ones were just for show. He was proudest of you, not of your grades or your business or the suits you wear now. Of you, the person you were becoming. He used to watch you when you didn't know he was watching, the way fathers do, and there was something in his face during those moments that I can only describe as amazement, like he couldn't quite believe he'd had a part in making something so particular. He never said that to you. I know he didn't. And I'm sorry for that, because you deserve to hear it. What I want to tell you, what I should have told you a long time ago, is that the thing your father wanted most for you was not success. It was not money or status or the kind of life that looks good from the outside. What he wanted was for you to become a man he could sit beside in silence and feel completely at ease. A man whose word was the same in private as it was in public. A man who, when the world got hard, turned toward the people he loved instead of away from them. I don't know if you are that man right now, but I believe you can be. I am your mother, and I have loved you since before you had a name, and that does not change. It will not change. But love without truth is just kindness with its eyes closed, and I have been kind with my eyes closed for too long. I need to talk to you, just you. Your mother, I sealed it and left it on the kitchen table at 6 in the morning, under his coffee mug, so it would be the first thing he touched. Then I drove to Dot's house and sat in her kitchen and drank coffee and waited. Dot read the letter. I'd made a copy, the way I made copies of everything now, the way Raymond had taught me to think, and set it down on her kitchen table and was quiet for a moment. You didn't accuse him of anything, she said. No, you're giving him a chance to come to it himself. Yes. She looked at me for a long moment. Dot had known me for 31 years. She had seen me at James's funeral and at my retirement party and at every point in between. She knew the difference between the face I showed the world and the face underneath it. You're not angry, she said, and it wasn't quite a question. I am, I said. I'm very angry, but I'm more tired of being afraid of what I'll find if I look directly at it. Dot reached across the table and put her hand over mine. There she is, she said quietly. There's my Lily. I didn't cry. I'd done my crying in the small room with the locked door in pieces over the previous 2 weeks, a little at a time, the way grief prefers to come when you're not watching for it. By that morning in Dot's kitchen, something had moved past the tears into something cleaner and harder and more useful. I was ready. 3 days after I left the letter, Earl called Raymond, and Raymond called me, and I sat in the parking lot of the Kroger again, my thinking spot apparently, the place where I made the calls that mattered. And Raymond told me what Earl had found. Tara had contacted a real estate agent. A comparative market analysis had been run on my house on Sycamore Drive 2 weeks prior. The estimate, $487,000. There was a bank account in Tara's name, not a joint account with Darnell, a personal account at a Florida credit union, opened 6 months ago. Earl had traced the routing number through the pattern of small transfers from the household account, the kind of transfers that look like nothing until you see them all at once. And there was a flight booking. Delta, Atlanta to Miami, one way, one passenger, one name. Tara Nicole Hollis. Departure date, 6 weeks from now. She booked it 3 months ago, Earl said through Raymond, right around the same time she contacted the real estate agent. I sat in my car in the Kroger parking lot and let the full shape of it settle into place. Tara had never planned to stay. Not with Darnell, not in Atlanta, not in any version of this life that included my son in it beyond his usefulness. She had come in with her designer posture and her pleasant voice and her color-coded childcare calendar, and she had spent 4 years positioning herself to walk away with as much as she could carry. The house, the credit lines, whatever she'd hoped to find in my mother's sewing box. Darnell was not her partner in this. He was her last step. Does he know any of this? I asked Raymond. I don't believe so, Raymond said. Earl thinks she's been very careful to keep the Florida account invisible. Darnell thinks the business pressure is why money is tight. He doesn't know about the transfers. I thought about my son, about the boy who fixed the leaky faucet and called me on Sundays and looked at me with that guilty, hopeful face when he wanted a second piece of pie. He had done a terrible thing to me, signed my name away, let my house become someone else's, chosen a woman's comfort over his mother's security. But he had not known the whole of what he was part of. That didn't absolve him, but it changed something. He came on a Saturday morning, alone, which told me the letter had done what I'd hoped it would do. Tara was at a yoga class she took every Saturday, one of the things she kept to herself, a standing appointment, the kind of time she protected fiercely in a way that I now understood differently. Darnell knocked on my bedroom door, which he hadn't done in years. Usually he just appeared in whatever room I was in, the easy assumption of a man who had grown up in the house and never quite stopped thinking of it as unconditionally his. The knock was different, deliberate, respectful. "Come in," I said. He was holding my letter. He'd folded and unfolded it enough times that the creases were soft, the paper beginning to go thin along the lines. His eyes were tired in the way that means someone hasn't slept, and when he sat down in the small chair by my desk, he looked like what he was, a 38-year-old man who had made choices he couldn't undo and was only beginning to understand the full weight of them. We sat in silence for a moment. The Atlanta morning was gray and quiet outside my window. From somewhere down the street, a lawnmower started and then stopped. "I know about the deed," I said. Not an accusation, just where we were starting. He closed his eyes briefly. "Mama, let me finish." He closed his mouth. "I know about the deed," I said again. "I know what I signed and I know what it means. I know you told me it was tax restructuring and I know I should have read it. And I know that the fact that I didn't read it is not entirely your fault because a part of me chose to trust you over reading, and I have to own that." He was watching me carefully, the way he used to watch me when he was small and couldn't tell whether he was in serious trouble or not. "But I also need you to know," I said, "that trust is not an excuse for what you asked me to sign. I was in my own kitchen. I was holding a cup of coffee. My granddaughter was laughing in the next room, and you put papers in front of me that took away everything your father and I spent 30 years building, and you watched me sign them, and you went back to your phone." The room was very quiet. "I know," Darnell said. His voice was rough. "I know, Mama." "Why?" I asked, not angry, genuinely asking. "I need to understand why." He pressed his hands together between his knees, his shoulders curved forward. He looked, just for a moment, like a little boy at a desk who has done something he can't explain and knows it. "She said it was the only way to secure the collateral for a business loan," he said slowly. "She said the bank needed clear ownership, no joint titles. She said it was temporary, that we'd add your name back once the financing was in place." "And you believed her?" He stopped. "I wanted to. I needed the loan and she had a plan and He looked at his hands. "I was afraid, Mama. The company was struggling and I didn't want you to know how bad it was, and she had a plan and I let her make the decisions because I was scared, and she seemed so sure. I looked at my son, at the fear under the expensive suit, the fear that had always been there, the fear of not being enough that James had never known how to address because he'd had the same fear himself. "I need to show you something," I said. I put Raymond's folder on the desk between us. I didn't speak while he read. I watched his face instead. The slow, awful progression of understanding that moved across it page by page. The quitclaim deed he already knew about. The credit accounts in James's name. He went very still at those. The charge statements, the forgeries, Earl's analysis of the billing addresses. When he got to the last page, the comparative market analysis on the house, the Florida bank account, the one-way flight to Miami, his hand stopped moving. He read that page 3 times. I counted. "She's leaving," he said. Not a question. The voice of a man watching a building he thought was solid turn out to be a painted backdrop. 6 weeks, I said. He set the folder down. I let the silence be what it needed to be. I didn't fill it. I'd been filling silences my whole life, in classrooms, in this house, in 33 years of marriage. And I was done filling silences that weren't mine to fill. "I brought her here," he said finally. "Into your home. I let her—" "Yes," I said. "She used Dad's—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "Yes," I said. "Mama, I didn't know about that. I swear to God I did not know about that." "I know you didn't," I said. And I did know. I had known it since Earl confirmed the account was in her name alone, set up before Darnell had any reason to be suspicious. But Darnell not knowing isn't the same as being innocent. You chose not to look. You chose the plan over the questions. You chose her certainty over your own instincts, and over your father's memory, and over me. He put his face in his hands. I waited. When he looked up, his eyes were wet, and something in his face had shifted. Something I hadn't seen there in a very long time. Something stripped back. Real. "What do I do?" he asked. And the question was so plain, so genuinely lost, that it was the first moment I felt something in my chest soften toward him. Not forgiveness. Forgiveness would take longer than a Saturday morning. But recognition. There was my son, under all of it. There was the boy who fixed the faucet. "You go home," I said. "You act normal. You don't tell her anything. And tomorrow morning, you call Raymond Aldridge, and you do exactly what he tells you to do." He nodded. "And Darnell." He looked at me. "When this is over, when all of it is over, you and I are going to have a different kind of conversation. About your father. About this house. About what a family actually is." "Yes, ma'am," he said, the way he used to say it at 10 years old. I almost smiled. Earl called Raymond on a Monday. He had found the final piece, not through financial records this time, but through a contact at the matchmaking service that had appeared on James's stolen Chase account. The first charge, 6 weeks after James's funeral, a retainer fee. The matchmaking service had been how Tara found Darnell, not coincidentally, not through some organic meeting at a charity gala, but through a deliberate, researched search. Earl had traced her social media activity from the period. She had been following the periphery of Darnell's professional network for 8 months before they met. She had attended 2 industry events he'd spoken at, positioned herself at a third. She had known his company was struggling before she introduced herself. She had known James had just died. She had known about my house. "How?" I asked Raymond. "Public records, mostly," Raymond said. "Property values, obituaries, social media. Your son posted about his father's passing on LinkedIn. It was public. She would have found it. I thought about Darnell posting about James on LinkedIn, the way people do, the way the world does now. Grief made public and searchable. I thought about Tara sitting somewhere with a screen in front of her, reading the post, calculating. She wasn't hunting Darnell, I said slowly. Not exactly. She was hunting the situation, the grieving family, the struggling business, the house. That's Earl's assessment, yes. He was the door, I said, and I was what was on the other side of it. Raymond was quiet. She never planned to stay past the point of maximum extraction, I said. The house sale would have been the last step. She'd have taken her share of the proceeds. transferred what she could to the Florida account, and been on that plane before Darnell understood what had happened. That's correct, Raymond said. I sat with that for a long moment. My son had not been her accomplice. He had been her instrument. And there was a particular kind of grief in that. Not the grief that makes you angry at someone, but the grief that makes you ache for them, for how thoroughly and deliberately they had been used. Raymond, I said, it's time. The federal agent's name was Patricia Webb. She was 41, composed, and she had the specific manner of someone who had delivered difficult news enough times to have learned how to do it without cruelty. She came to Raymond's office on a Wednesday. My day, I noticed, the universe having a small, dry sense of humor, with a colleague and a folder of her own. Darnell was already there when I arrived. He had called Raymond the morning after our conversation and had been cooperative and complete in everything Raymond asked of him. He looked hollowed out, the way people look when they've been carrying something heavy for a long time and someone has finally taken it from them, and the relief and the shame are indistinguishable. Agent Webb reviewed what Earl and Raymond had compiled. The identity theft, the forged signatures, the credit accounts in James's name, the flight, the Florida account. The posthumous identity theft alone carries significant federal charges, she said. Combined with the wire fraud through the interstate transfers, we're looking at a substantial case. She looked at Darnell. Your cooperation and the evidence you've provided are significant factors, she said. That will be communicated to the U.S. Attorney's Office. I understand, Darnell said. They coordinated with Atlanta PD. The arrest was made that afternoon, while Tara was at the house, my house, the house on Sycamore Drive that still had my oak chair in the corner and James's ghost in the kitchen light. Darnell and I were not there. Raymond had advised against it, and I had agreed. This was not a moment I needed to witness. I had already seen everything I needed to see. We were at corner grind. Dot was there too, because of course she was, because she had been there for every significant moment of my adult life, and she wasn't about to miss this one. We were on our second cups when Darnell's phone buzzed with a text from Agent Webb. 2 words, done, clean. The 3 of us sat in the coffee shop on Peachtree, and the morning went on around us. The barista calling names, the door opening and closing, the city living its ordinary Tuesday life. And I felt something release in my chest that I hadn't realized I'd been holding since the morning I found my mother's box on the kitchen table with the lid wrong. Dot put her hand on top of mine on the table. Darnell looked out the window for a long moment. Then he looked at me. I don't deserve to sit here with you, he said. No, I agreed. Not yet. But you're here, and you're trying, and that's where it starts. He nodded. He looked back out the window. Your father would have told you the same thing, he said, in about half as many words. Darnell made a sound that was almost a laugh. Almost. Dot squeezed my hand and let go, and picked up her coffee cup and said, Somebody want to tell me if we're getting pastries, because I have been very patient through a very difficult morning. And I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in longer than I could measure, and flagged down the server. 3 months later. It was an ordinary Wednesday morning in January, which is Atlanta's version of winter. Cold enough to mean it, not cold enough to be dramatic about it. The kind of morning that requires a sweater and makes the coffee taste especially right. I was in the kitchen at 6 o'clock. The overhead light was on. The coffee was made. And James's oak chair was back in its place by the kitchen window, in the exact spot where the floor still held the ghost of 4 small circles from 30 years of morning newspapers. I had moved it back myself, 2 months ago, on a Sunday afternoon when the house was quiet. I hadn't asked anyone. I had just moved it. I sat in my chair, at my table, in my kitchen, in my house, and I looked out at the back garden. There were tomato seedlings on the windowsill, 6 small terracotta pots, the clay kind, lined up in the January light. Cherokee purples in 2 of them, sun golds in 2 more, and 2 I was still deciding about. I'd started them in early December, in the garage, under the grow light I'd ordered online. They were leggy still, reaching for the window, but they were alive and they were mine. Zoe had helped me plant them on a Saturday. She'd been serious about it, the way 7-year-olds are serious about important things, pressing her small fingers into the soil and asking careful questions. "Why do we plant them inside first?" she'd asked. "Because they need to be strong enough before they meet the world," I told her. She'd considered this. "Like practice?" "Exactly like practice." She'd nodded, satisfied, and pressed another seed into the dirt. The quitclaim deed had been voided through Raymond's petition. Lack of informed consent, documented undue influence, and the broader context of the fraud case gave the court sufficient grounds. My name was back on my house. The process had taken 8 weeks and cost me a portion of my mother's gift that I considered well spent. The credit accounts in James's name had been reported, flagged, and the fraud documented with all 3 institutions. His credit record had been formally cleared. A strange bureaucratic tenderness, restoring the good name of a man 4 years gone. Raymond had handled the paperwork personally. He'd waived his fee for that part. I hadn't argued. Darnell was living in a rented apartment across town. He came to the house on Sundays for dinner and on Saturday mornings when Zoe was with me, which she was more often now. Tara had no custody rights, and her legal situation made everything simple in that particular way that terrible things sometimes do. Darnell was paying restitution through a payment arrangement Raymond had negotiated. He was also paying his mother-in-law's credit card bills voluntarily without being asked. He had not complained about any of it. He was learning to show up, quietly, consistently, without needing to be acknowledged for it. He was learning, in other words, to be more like his father. I didn't say that to him yet, but I would. The Morrison Heritage Properties account had been a conversation I'd had with Robert Morrison himself, a phone call that lasted 90 minutes and left me slightly dazed on my back porch for an hour afterward. Robert was 62 and had his father Gerald's manner, unhurried, thorough, quietly proud of what they'd built together in Savannah over 40 years. "Your mother was one of our first investors," he told me. "She never sold a single share, not once in 35 years. I always respected that. She had a long view." "She had patience," I said. "She grew up with very little, and she understood that things take time." "The current value of the holding," he said, "is closer to 430 than 400. It's been a good year for the portfolio." I had not touched the principal. I didn't intend to, mostly. I had done one thing with it so far, and I had done it in November, and it had felt more right than almost anything I'd done in years. At the East Side Elementary Winter Assembly, the one where the 3rd graders sang and the parents sat in folding chairs in the gymnasium, and the principal gave a speech, I had sat in the front row as a guest. The principal, Dr. Yolanda Harris, had announced a new scholarship fund, annual awards, for 3rd grade students demonstrating academic promise and financial need. "This fund, Doctor," Harris said, "was established by a former East Side teacher and a lifelong member of this community in honor of her mother and her late husband." She read the name, the Estelle and James Beaumont Educational Fund. From the front row, I looked out at the gymnasium full of children, 3rd graders in their holiday sweaters, squinting into the assembly lights, fidgeting the way 3rd graders do. And I felt very quietly like myself, like the truest version of myself, the one that had been there all along, waiting under the small surrenders and the rearranged furniture and the years of disappearing. "You water the seed," I had told so many children over 28 years. "You don't pull the stem." I had finally learned to apply it to myself. My mother's blue tin is on the kitchen table most mornings, not put away anymore, not on a high shelf. Zoe has claimed the brass thimble as her own personal treasure, which I allow because my mother would have loved nothing more. On Saturday mornings when Zoe is here, we sit at the kitchen table and I teach her to sew. Simple stitches first, the ones my mother taught me when I was not much older than Zoe is now. She is not patient, the way 7-year-olds are not patient, and she pulls the thread too tight and makes loops where the stitches should be straight, and she gets frustrated and asks why it's so hard. "Because anything worth making takes practice," I tell her, and practice means doing it wrong first. "How many times wrong?" "As many as it takes." She considers this with great seriousness and picks up the needle again. My mother's photograph is face up in the box. It will stay that way. On a Sunday in December, the first Sunday Darnell came for dinner after things had settled into their new shape, He sat in James's chair. Not deliberately, I don't think. He came into the kitchen looking for me, and I was at the stove, and he sat down at the table, and he sat in the chair without thinking about it, the way you sit in the nearest available seat. I turned from the stove and saw him sitting there, my son, in his father's chair, in the same winter afternoon light, and I felt something that took me a moment to name. Not pain, not grief, something quieter, something like the feeling of a house settling into its foundation at the end of a long day. A deep structural sound that means everything is bearing the weight it was built to bear. I turned back to the stove. "Dinner's in 20 minutes, I said. "Smells good," he said. And we stayed like that. Him at the table, me at the stove, the kitchen quiet between us. And it was not nothing, and it was not everything, and it was exactly what we had to work with, which was enough. The morning I finally understood, not just in my mind, but in my body, in the place where you know things for real, was an ordinary Wednesday. I came downstairs at 6. The coffee was waiting. The seedlings on the windowsill were leaning toward the light. James's chair was in its place. I poured my coffee and sat down and looked out at the garden, at the red Georgia clay, at the back fence where the tomatoes would grow again, come May. Everything looked exactly the same as it had on the morning I began this story. But it wasn't the same. I wasn't the same. The house wasn't the same. I had stopped disappearing. I don't know exactly when it happened. There was no single morning, no single moment. It was a return the way spring is a return. Gradual, unmistakable, unannounced until suddenly the thing is simply true. But I know this. One morning I woke up, and I came downstairs, and I poured my coffee, and I sat in my kitchen in my house, and the coffee tasted right again. And I knew. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If any part of Lily's journey felt familiar, if you have ever looked around at your own life and felt like the furniture had been moved while you were sleeping, I hope you heard what I most wanted to say. It is never too late to come back to yourself. The door is always open. It was never locked from the outside. Leave me a comment and tell me, have you ever had to find your way back to something you thought you'd lost? I would love to hear your story. And if this moved you, please share it with someone who might need it today.